Hello everybody, this is Enforma and welcome to my second SFM tutorial, where today we're going to be going over a lot of things, but first of all, I'm going to be going over how to access the SFM workshop and download models. So first you want to go to your library and go to software, and then down here you'll see a tab that says browse the workshop. It's a small little button, should be bigger I think, but you're going to want to click that. And then you'll be greeted to this page. There's a lot here. I'm not going to click recent just due to controversial stuff on the workshop. But anyway, let's type in Springtrap here. And then here, you'll get a library of all the models that you can use that are on the workshop publicly. So you can sort by most popular. I like to do that. I usually like to click model because there's a little thing over time period, a week, today. Come on, I need more options than that. So let's have model. And let's go to all time. The most popular model being Springtrap V4, obviously. Well, you can use this to your advantage and find a bunch of models that you might not know are on the workshop. So I'd recommend you go through this sometime and find some models that you like. So for the rest of this tutorial, we're going to be going over camera settings, light settings, Uber lights, managing your lights, using multiple cameras, moving your camera, and a little camera mobility tip that I've picked up along the way. So let's hop into our session and get started. So here we are back in our session. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these lights. We'll redo some lighting later on. But first, we are going over camera settings. Camera settings are vital to your animation. There's not too many of them, but each one's just as important as the last. So let's go around and move our camera. So remember what I taught yesterday, which I recorded it yesterday, but whenever this is actually being uploaded, whenever you click, drag your camera, Control Z if you want to move it back if you make a mistake. And let's talk about field of view. Field of view, well, if you have it up too high, it can look weird like this. It looks good for some shots, but it's very situational. So I'd only recommend using it at some points. Pretty much it's just like your zoom, and, well, it's very crucial for your animations. Like, look at that. You don't want to have your field of view too high or things are going to look very blurry. Have your field of view too low, and, well, it can actually look pretty decent. But it's harder to use because you're going to have your camera really far away. So use that in a niche situation. I recommend keeping it around here. And now we have two things that I call Jekyll and Hyde. Why don't I go into the graph editor, or the motion editor? I get those mixed up. But anyway, Jekyll and Hyde, or focal distance and aperture. The reason I'm calling them Jekyll and Hyde is because they work together at all times. So the way that Jekyll works, our focal distance, is you might see a little bit of a purple line here. What I usually like to do, if you want to focus in on something, because yes, that is what that does. Let's have it kind of clip in here, like onto the mask. Excuse me. And then our aperture, you can see nothing really changes. So you might be like, what does focal distance even do? Let's slide our aperture up. And then you can notice, bam, the background is out of focus, because this is your focus. Now, if you move around your focal distance, move it higher, now Springtrap's out of focus, and you have it ahead of him, he's still out of focus. So you can have your focus on one object, which I honestly find that pretty nifty. So if you want to have like a high definition shot, you can mess with that. It's really good for focusing in on certain details. Now bloom, we're going to spawn in a light here. We're not going to use it for too much. Let's just spawn one up here. And set our shadows, and you might realize that there's a bit of like blur coming off the model itself, and maybe you don't want that at all. Maybe you can slide your bloom scale all the way to the left, and then you can see it's all gone. Or if you need more, move it to the right. I recommend keeping it around the default, maybe a little lower unless the shot demands so, because SFM bloom is notorious for not being good to most people in the community. And then you have these three. These three work in tandem with each other. Why don't we get rid of the scout here? He's still there. But anyway, your SSAO bias, your strength, and your radius. These all mess with your, well, kind of, the ambient occlusion on your models. Now, there is a chance, if you mess with these sliders and you don't see anything, you might want to go here and hit render settings, turn it off entirely, because it drops your frame rate pretty bad if you're on a low-end PC. And on some of them, it doesn't even run, so just if it doesn't run for you, keep this off at all times. We'll go into these settings later, but we're turning this back on because I have AO. And some settings, you might want to play around with these a little bit and find something that you like, because there's a lot of AO settings, and, well, you might want to find something that's good for you. Like, if you, like, well, I think it's self-explanatory. You got stuff like that, dark AO. You got some more light AO. Mess with the strength, make it stronger and weaker. Ooh, that rings of 2016 right there. But anyway, those are some of the camera settings. If there are any others, I am unaware of them, and I'm still learning SFM too, so I'm kind of in the same boat as some of you guys. But anyway, I think it's about time that we move on to the next section. And now we go on to our light settings. In this, I'll also be talking about useful light tips. Let's move back our camera a little bit so we can see some more of Springtrap. More just so we can see the top of his head. Re-enable the bones. And move his ears a little bit. Just because we're going to be playing with lighting a little bit. So let's just spawn in our first initial light. Enable our lighting here. And what you can notice is we have a lot of settings. Most of them we didn't go into depth yesterday. Now, some of these I honestly don't know what they do, so you might have to experiment with these a bit. But I'm going to go briefly over the ones that we talked about recently. Intensity makes your light darker or brighter. Your ambient intensity, I don't know what that does. Your horizontal and vertical FOV can make light smaller or bigger. It follows it follows like for example, if this one's bigger, well, I don't know how to explain it, but you kind of get the gist. Just mess with both of them, since it usually follows the bigger one of the two. And that gets more in depth a bit later, I believe. Radius kind of spreads the light, making it kind of more like a fill light. Like you can see, there's less shadows here, even though you got a shadow right here. Your shadow filter size will sharpen your shadows, or if you want them a bit kind of like that, let's set it around here. And your shadow attention, if you have it all the way up, you can see light behind your shadows, but if you have it all the way down, your shadows will be pitch black. Now, your minimum distance is pretty much the minimum distance that the light will go. It's a little confusing because sometimes it messes with shadows a lot. And max distance, it's kind of the same thing. I really don't know much about those things. Constant attuition and linear attuition. Like this, all I know is it makes your light really bright. And this one is more on kind of a, you get a little bit before it starts going to max. Like up here, you're already at your max. I don't mess with those too much. Quadratic attuition, or attenuation, this one's important. Let's say you want to set a light kind of dark, but you're like, no, that's a little too close to there. If I slide it more, it's going to go to pitch black. But I want it to be darker. You see how it's in the middle? You can slide this, and you can make your light a bit darker. Or if you want to, you can make it brighter. It's kind of like your second intensity. But it's very, very useful for lighting. It's one of the most important sliders. Shadow depth bias. I'm unsure what that does, but it messes with your shadows a little bit. That's all I know. This, I'm not sure what that does either. Just more shadow stuff. Anyway, Z far a 10. This is pretty much a more ordinary, like how far your light is going to go. Now you see, with our Springtrap, how about we spawn a wall behind Springtrap? Okay, any model will do. Let's drag this back, and let's move it to a point where it's not going to be hit too much by the light. So you see Springtrap is way more like hit with this light. But if you want it to not hit the wall, click this and drag it back. And then you can see it's not reaching that wall, but if you want it to go further, usually for, well, models that are further away, you'll want to push it up. This is just kind of the distance of your lighting and can be helpful for making some more dynamic shots. Like, if we moved our light up here, it wouldn't affect much of Springtrap, but you can kind of get an effect sort of like that. I actually kind of like that, but we're not going to be messing too much with that because we have more settings to explain that I kind of get. Near edge and far edge, I'm clueless on what they do. Cut on and cut off, same thing, I don't mess with those. Volumetric intensity and noise strength. These two work in tandem with each other because of another setting that we have not gone into. Here are more light settings for you guys. One of them I forgot to put on this list because I forgot they existed. But first, let's hit enable volumetrics. Nothing happened? Boom! You got yourself a bit of a spotlight kind of thing going on. Now, with your volumetric intensity, this will not affect the brightness of your light, but how intense your spotlight is going to be, your volumetric light. If you want a kind of a foggy effect, but you don't want the light to be too bright, then you can do something kind of like that. Now, your noise strength is kind of just like give or take. I think like if you have the noise strength higher, it'll give off more detail. But if you have it all the way like that, then voila. I'm not too familiar with noise strength. Now width, edge width, height, and edge height. I'm not sure about the edges, but those mostly work with something called Uber lights, which we will get to in a little bit. Anyway, then we have our colors, which we explained, which are pretty self-explanatory, but we went over those before. So let's lower our volumetric and let's set it to a bit of a yellow color. There we go. Now, we want to move our focal distance a bit more. And I'm going to talk to you about some ways that you can use lights. Now here, I don't really know specific names for them. They're probably more like professional names for these, but I'm just going to kind of go off of what I call them. This is your kind of main light. This is what's going to be like the most impactful and important to lighting your scene. Let's add another light, and now we're going to create a rim light. These are important for creating depth, in a sense. But anyway, we're going to place this around here so it only hits the side of the face and the shoulders. And then you can see it kind of creates like a little rim effect. It's important to make your shadow attention dark here and set your shadow filter size to a decent bit. And you got yourself a little light behind the model. You can have this at multiple angles, such as this, and mess with the intensity. Not bad, not bad. Now, we're going to go for a fill light. A fill light, you see all those shadows? If you don't want them black, which I don't recommend because apparently there's nothing black in real life, you will want to, or pitch black, I mean, my apologies. Then you'll want to hit your radius, set your intensity pretty low, and you can see it's not too dark, but we may have forgotten our quadratic. And let's hit that. You got yourself a pretty dark light. Now you can color this accordingly. I'm going to make it how about we make this a dark green color. There we go. That's looking pretty now. I like that. Now we can add multiple of these lights, such as another rim light for right here. So we can capture this area right here. Remember what we did before. Try to make it about a similar color. Don't try to make it differentiate too much from our previous rim light. And how about we add another sort of fill light? This is just kind of a small detail. I'll just say this is like a detail light. Set something here. Let's make it a little bit of a kind of dark red color. And there we go. That is looking really nice. So we can have our volumetric. Let's set one about like back here. And let's enable our volumetric. And we got a bit of a volumetric. We don't want it too bright because bright volumetrics can capture too much attention of the scene. So let's darken it. And let's make it like a orange color. Why not? And then, well, why not? How about we have an underlight? Because underlights can be important. Whew, don't sneeze on me. And then let's do that. And voila, there we go. We've got ourselves an underlight. Now, I'm adding more lights, even if it's making the scene look worse, because there's something important that we're going to have to learn. let's have a side light here. Now, I don't recommend using lights like these because it looked better 3 lights ago. But hey, now we're at 8 lights. Not bad. Let's add another one. Whoops. Too many. You got an error up there. Too many shadowed lights. You can only have 8 lights with shadows. So, what you can do though, if you right click on your light, disable shadow, and this might not look good on most parts of your scene, but it'll re-enable your light, but it'll phase through everything. So you'll be able to see things, like if we pointed this at a walled part of the torso, we would be able to see inside the model. Such as, if we go here, bam, you can see inside because there is no shadow there. Now, I would recommend using that for like your fill lights, as long as it doesn't like intrude too much. Because your fill lights, well, they're not what you're wanting to have, like, kind of catch the attention. Like, for example, let's find our red light again. I think it was right here. Now, if we disable shadows here, it doesn't, it kind of spills onto this arm, which, if you like that, then go for that. But if you'll want to be careful with these, because you can have 8 lights maximum with shadows. There are many people that use like 20 lights, but they are very careful and usually utilizing your Z-far attention for that kind of stuff, so they don't hit too many details on accident. And now another light setting, which is very important, are your gobos. Your gobo textures, they are infinitely important. And if you want to set a gobo, you right-click your light, and then hit Gobo Texture. Now, what do we have here? We have a list of all of our textures. Most of these you're not going to need, but if we hit something and type in flashlight, we now have a textured light. A way that you can make a gobo is have like, well, I'll go over that in another video, because making a gobo texture is a little bit of work, but it can be worth it in the end. So we can have ourselves like a flashlight, hitting on to Springtrap over here. Get rid of our shadows. And voila, here we go. We have a bit of a flashlight. Some textures are much more impactful than others. Like, let me go to something like Gobo. Let me find something. What's a texture? Like, I have some that just say animated by Enforma, but that's just because of the sole purpose of using these for lighting up lyrics, and you get that's just a better example of like what a gobo is, and you can mess around with the colors, etc., etc. But anyway, I think that's enough about going on with the lighting. I think that teaches a decent bit. Just play around with your settings and pay attention to the tutorial, and you should have decent lighting at this point if you know how to use it correctly. Now let's get on to the next part of the video. This is getting a little long. Uber lights, I personally find them important to teach, but I'm still learning about them myself, so let's learn together a little bit. A way that you can enable an Uber light, even if you didn't see the setting over here, you're going to want to right-click on your light, show an element viewer, light. And you'll see all these settings. Don't be too intimidated. Most of these are just pretty much kind of similar to your other lights. Ooh, actually, what's that setting? Hold on. I saw something called roundness. How about we have that set to 0? Oh, 0.1. Oh well. -1. Okay, yeah, that doesn't really affect that. Okay. Not like I expected it to, but I'm just playing around. That's an important part of SFM, is playing around with things. Now let's set this as an Uber light, and it might not see much of a difference, but all I know about Uber lights is you get a little more utility from them, because on your average Joe light, let's spawn one in here for example, your sliders such as your height and your width, they're not going to work. On your Uber lights, on the other hand, yeah, there we go. You can kind of play around with that, but they are very, very finicky, so I would double click and set like the 0.1. You got to set them really low, and then you can get a light like that, like if you want a very specific kind of light. And the same applies to height. Very, very finicky settings, but there you can mess with the edge. Okay, whoa, okay, that's a little crazy. I never knew about that setting and what it could do. Doesn't seem like it really keeps much of it static, but that's a very interesting little setting to play with. I'll have to experiment with that later. But anyway, that's all I'll have to say about Uber Lights. Let's go on to the next section. I was a loser and I put my managing lights into the light settings, when I mean managing lights, I mean like managing like shadowed lights and your normal lights, whatever, or your shadow lights and non-shadow lights. But now we're going to be going on to utilizing multiple cameras. Now here we have one camera. Let's set it around over here. Set our focal distance so it's focused around our area, and set that. And how about we go make a new camera? Now we can have this. Let's set it to around over here. And we're going to go back, do our create animation set for existing element, and camera 2. You see that we'll have our same settings, which that's always something nice. So you have a kind of a base ground. You don't have to if you have special AO, you don't have to mess with that. But then you can have two cameras. The way that you can utilize this is if you want to kind of have an effect where you render at two different camera angles, well, you can use those. Because, well, what's stopping you? But those are if like you want to catch multiple camera angles, and there are other things you can do with two cameras, but I'm going to stick to one. That's usually what I do. And using two cameras can be a little situational. But that's for a later video when I go more in depth about cameras, especially what I call RT cameras. But anyway, let's save, and let's go on to the next part of the section. Or next section. Goodness, I'm bad at English. An important little part, moving your camera. Your camera is something that, like your models, can be moved around. Like, well, anything else. You can move around with your field of view, like if we space, go over here, and if we want to click drag and then scroll, we can have an effect kind of like that. It's a wacky little effect, but moving your camera is important. So like if your character is moving around, you might want to have something kind of, or if you can have something panning. Panning is an important part. Mess with your keyframes, slow it down, make it more of a cinematic panning effect. You can animate your zooming in, of course, like I showed before. And let's move it a little bit like that. Oh, that's a little too fast. Let's set that to around like that. Looking nice. But you can also move the transform of the camera. So what you'll want to do, well, I don't know if I want to round this before. Space, and then pause again to get our that keyframe and our graph editor. I'm sorry if I'm jumping around. I'm having a bit of a tough time recording this at the moment. Z, right? And if we hold R, rotate. But you can only go 180 degrees, and it's a little bit of a bummer. You can't flip all the way around. But anyway, let's move our camera. And you want to have a bit of, like, spaced camera movements, but you can play around with camera movements however you want. Just make sure that it looks nice. Maybe you want to have something like rule of thirds, something like around this area. Well, I don't know my rule of thirds exactly, but maybe something like that. Maybe I don't know. Move the camera however you think it looks nice, and just try not to make it too spastic, because then it will just kind of ruin your shot. Like this. Like that just looks bad. Now we just have it like that. It still looks pretty bad, but we can move around. And an important part of moving your camera is if you move your camera, you're going to have to move your focal distance as well, so it follows focus. So if we do that, we'll have all these little areas in between still in focus with the area at hand. Now, I'm going to get rid of that, and next I'm going to go on to a little tip that I really like to use. This is a little fun one, and I hope that some of you guys can find it useful. Last but not least, this is my camera mobility tip. This is something I love using, but first, we're going to have to create a new light. Why create a new light? Well, it's simple. Let's mute our light so it's not showing anything. So, why are we doing that, you might be asking? Now, let's do something called a lock. This is an important part. I will go on to this later, but you'll want to attach or grab the transform of your light and drag it up to the transform of your camera. And, well, here we go. You got yourself a little more camera mobility. Like, let's have our camera move around to, like, over this way. So we got a little bit of camera panning. But maybe if you want to have a little bit of, like, kind of movement in between. It's hard to, like, kind of hard to do something like that without messing up the continuity of the movement. So what you can do is click and drag your camera, and maybe we can do something a little wavy, like go up, down, swaggity, swaggity, bam, boo. That doesn't matter. But now you can do all sorts of stuff with this. And this is all your light moving the camera. Now this can be useful for many things. We can grab our light, and if we wanted to move something to a beat, we could do something like that. Have it, if there was a beat to this, you'd be hearing it, but you might be curious of what I'm doing. Kind of move, it just makes our light move a little faster, and it's still a little wonky. But if we select all, and here's something called our keyframe, like keyframe types. I like to use the step tangent, and then here, bam, 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 bam. Just a little tip for you. You don't have to use this in animation. It's not crucial, but it can be quite nice. Oh, and now our camera is locked like that. Since it still has like the memory of using that, let's see if we can get that to go away. So pressing M on both sides. Oh, no, okay. Maybe if we copied, deleted, since we don't have that anymore, and paste. And there we go, we're back at our original camera movement. And now there's all sorts of things that you can do to move your camera. Mess around with these. Select all. I usually like to use our flat tangent over here. And you'll see it kind of accelerates and then decelerates. It looks nice. But anyway, I think that's going to wrap it up for our little tutorial on camera movements or cameras, lights, and moving the camera. But moving the lights, that's a whole other nightmare on itself. You can use some of the knowledge that I gave out for moving your camera to move your lights. It gets a lot more difficult upon moving a model, so that's why I kind of didn't teach it today. But I hope this was an informative tutorial for you guys. And if you enjoyed, you can leave a like to support the series. And if you want to see more, comment down below and tell me what kind of things you need help with a lot in SFM. And I think that's my cue to head out.